So, someone made a big mistake recently. They sold a Rolex to a stranger on Facebook Marketplace. The buyer paid, and the watch was shipped. But then the bank clawed the payment back as fraud. How did that happen? Let's find out. The handshake that disappeared. For most of the last 100 years, selling a watch worked like this. Two people agreed on a price. One handed over cash, the other handed over the watch. No forms, no fees, no third party watching. Just two humans deciding to trust each other for the length of one conversation. That's not really how it works anymore. If you want to sell your own watch to another private person today, you'll likely need a platform to verify you own it, an escrow account to hold the money, a third-party inspector to confirm the watch is real, and sometimes a forum account old enough to be considered trustworthy. Private sale still exists as a phrase. In practice, it's been absorbed into a system of gatekeepers, most of which didn't exist 15 years ago. There's a photo you're now expected to take before some platforms will even let you list a watch for sale. The watch, held next to a note with today's date written on it, in your own handwriting. We'll get back to why that photo exists and what it's actually defending against. Because the honest version of this story isn't really about fakes, even though fakes are part of it. It's quieter than that. The trust between two strangers trading money for a watch used to be a conversation. Now it's a company. Go back to 2010. A collector wants to sell a Submariner he's worn for 6 years. He posts it in a forum classified section, or mentions it to a friend who mentions it to another friend, or takes out a small ad in a hobbyist newsletter. A buyer emails. They talk on the phone. Maybe they meet at a diner, and the cash gets counted out between 2 coffee cups on a Formica table. The watch changes wrists. Nobody involved needed a company's permission to make that happen. Sometimes it happened at a hotel conference room during a regional watch show, 2 strangers meeting in person specifically so the deal could close face-to-face, watch in hand, cash counted out on the spot. Sometimes it happened over a landline, with a buyer 3 states away trusting a voice they'd never seen enough to wire a deposit before the watch even shipped. Sometimes it was 2 members of the same online forum who'd traded friendly posts for a year before either one mentioned they had something to sell. None of it was formalized. None of it required a license, a badge, or a fee paid to a third party just for the privilege of talking to each other. All of it depended on the same simple wager: that the person on the other end was who they said they were, and wanted what they said they wanted, and had no reason strong enough to break that arrangement. That system worked because both sides had something real to lose by lying. Reputation was local. Scam somebody in a hobbyist community of a few thousand members, and everyone knew by the following week. The pool was small enough to police itself. It didn't matter whether the buyer was across town or across an ocean. What mattered was that both people were drawing from the same small pond of names, the same handful of forums, the same reputations that traveled by word of mouth faster than any database could have tracked them. Distance was never really the risk. Anonymity was. And for most of watch collecting's history, true anonymity barely existed because the community was too small to hide inside. It doesn't feel like 15 years should be long enough to kill a system like that. But it was. By 2024, that same kind of forum had grown from a few thousand members into a marketplace with thousands of listings live at any given hour. Somewhere in that growth, the thing that made it work quietly broke. What private sale actually meant. Private sale means no company sits between the 2 people trading money for goods. No fee taken off the top. No enforced contract. No dispute process built into the transaction itself. Just 2 individuals and whatever trust they can build in the time it takes to close a deal. That kind of system depends on something small communities have and large ones don't: consequences. In a town of 5,000 people, rip somebody off and you can't buy coffee at the same diner without someone bringing it up. In a marketplace of 5 million anonymous accounts, you can build a new profile picture and a new name by lunchtime. Scale is the actual villain here, not any one scammer. Watch collecting used to be small enough that reputation functioned like its own currency. Real question. Do you remember your first watch bought from a total stranger, and did it go fine? Drop it below. For a long time, it mostly did go fine. Fraud existed, but it stayed rare enough that people kept taking the risk, because the math still favored trust over caution. Then platforms made watch selling easy. Anyone could list anything to anyone, anywhere, instantly, without knowing them at all. And the moment a market crosses a certain size, it stops behaving like a community and starts behaving like a population. Populations don't police themselves. They can't. Nobody knows everybody anymore, and nobody's expected to. So the very thing that made private sale efficient, instant access to a global pool of buyers, is the same thing that broke the mechanism that kept it honest. You gained reach. You lost the ability to know who you were actually dealing with. That's not a design flaw anybody planned. It's a trade nobody explained clearly enough at the time. Efficiency and trust turned out to be opposites the whole way through, and it took losing a decade's worth of trust to notice. There's a rough idea in anthropology, sometimes called Dunbar's number, that human beings can only hold somewhere around 150 stable, trusting relationships at once. Past that number, the brain stops tracking who's reliable in any personal way and starts leaning on shortcuts instead. A badge, a star rating, a number of posts, a verified checkmark. Watch collecting spent decades living comfortably under that number. A hobbyist forum with a few thousand members still functioned like a small town because the people who actually bought and sold watches to each other numbered in the dozens, not the thousands. Everyone had, at minimum, heard of everyone else. The moment platforms pushed real participation past a few 100,000 active users, the shortcut stopped being optional. It became the entire system. Nobody decided that on purpose. It's just what happens to trust once a group gets too large for anyone to actually hold in their head. Picture the seller who's done it the old way his whole life. Maybe his father taught him what a real bezel insert should feel like under a thumbnail, taught him who to trust and how to spot a story that didn't add up. He lists his watch the way he always has. A message comes in from a buyer who sounds normal, asks the right questions, offers a fair price. He has no way of knowing the same message, word for word, went out to 40 other sellers that same week. He's not being careless. He's just running rules that used to work. That message is not random. It's a script, and the numbers behind that script are worse than most sellers realize. Before we move on to the next part, let me tell you this. Most people don't realize this, but buying a watch the wrong way can cost you thousands, and you won't even notice it until it's too late. That's why I created a complete insider guide to buying watches. The goal is simple. I'll help you stop guessing and start buying smart. You'll find the guide in the pinned comment and description. Now, let's move on to the next part. The surge. Scams on peer-to-peer marketplaces did not creep upward. They jumped. In a widely cited BIN-verified analysis of scam complaints, marketplace fraud rose roughly 185% in a single year, and Zelle scams climbed 86% over that same stretch. The two fastest-growing scam categories the firm tracked that year. Those numbers cover every category of goods, not just watches, but watches sit near the top of the list for one obvious reason. They're small, they're valuable, and they're easy to ship. In human terms, for every 5 people who tried to sell something to a stranger online last year, roughly 1 more of them ran into fraud than the year before. That's not a rounding error. That's a system failing at scale. The mechanics are almost boringly simple, which is part of what makes them work. A buyer reaches out, agrees to a price fast, maybe too fast. They ask to move the conversation off the platform into text messages or a different app, where there's no record if anything goes wrong. They send a payment that looks confirmed on the seller's end. The seller ships the watch. Days later, the payment reverses, or the buyer's bank flags it as fraud. Or the confirmation was never real money at all, just a screenshot built to look like one. By the time the seller notices, the watch is 3 states away. Honestly, this is the part of the research that got to me the most. Nobody in these stories did anything reckless. They just answered a message the way you'd answer any message from someone who sounded normal. That 86% Zelle number, it's not a number on a chart. It's a specific person, mid-transaction, watching a payment confirmation appear on their phone and believing it, because believing it is what the old system trained them to do. Forums noticed first, because forums are where the wounded show up to compare notes. Members started posting warnings about buyers who vanished the second a watch shipped, about payment apps that let scammers fake a sent notification, about accounts that got banned and simply reappeared under a new name through a different browser. One community moderator described the job of catching repeat offenders as detective work. Hours spent cross-referencing shipping addresses and writing styles just to keep one person from doing it twice. That's the part nobody accounts for when they talk about just being careful. Being careful assumes you can tell the difference between a normal buyer and a rehearsed one. Increasingly, you can't. The performance got too good. The newer version of the scam is even harder to catch than the payment tricks. Instead of faking a bank confirmation, some buyers and sellers now submit doctored ownership photos of their own, since a photo can be edited just as easily as a screenshot can be faked. Chrono24's proof of ownership rule, the time-stamped photo meant to stop exactly this kind of fraud, is already being probed for its own weak points by the same population it was built to screen out. That's the pattern worth noticing early, because it repeats itself. Every defense gets built to solve last year's scam. Every defense gets a workaround within a year or two of launching. Nobody in this story ever actually wins the arms race. They just keep raising the price of admission for the next round. So, the platforms did the only thing left to do. They stopped trusting the people and started building machinery to replace the trust instead. eBay closes the door. In September 2020, eBay rolled out something called Authenticity Guarantee for watches. The rule was simple and, at the time, radical. Any watch sold for $2,000 or more in the United States would be physically inspected by an independent expert before the buyer ever received it. Not a photo review, not a description check. A real watch, in a real facility, examined by someone trained to catch the difference between genuine and convincing. This is what that means for a private seller today. You list your watch. A buyer commits. Instead of shipping straight to that buyer, you ship to eBay's authentication partner first. They check the watch against the listing, run a multi-point inspection, and only then does it continue on to the person who paid for it. If it passes, the sale is considered complete, and past a certain point, it can't be returned on authenticity grounds at all. For watches priced between $500 and $1,999, the same inspection is available, but somebody has to pay for it. $80, charged to the buyer at checkout. Above $2,000, eBay eats the cost itself. Sell high enough, and the machine works for free. Sell in the middle of the market, and you or your buyer pays out of pocket for the privilege of being trusted. Push past $10,000, and there's an escrow option too. The buyer's money sits in a holding account until every condition of the sale is actually met. Would you rather pay $80 for peace of mind, or trust the seller's word for it? None of this happened because eBay woke up one day wanting to spend money on watchmakers. It happened because the platform's biggest fear, expressed plainly in its own materials, is a buyer who receives something that doesn't match the description. That fear got expensive enough that building an entire inspection network became cheaper than losing customers to it. The scale involved is easy to underestimate. Even before Authenticity Guarantee existed, eBay was already moving something like 2 million watches a year through its marketplace, spread across every price point from Casio to Patek. A fraud rate that would barely register as a rounding error on a small platform turns into thousands of ruined transactions a year once you're operating at that size. Authenticity Guarantee wasn't built because eBay suddenly started caring more about watch collectors. It was built because complaints became a pattern, and a pattern became a liability large enough to show up on a balance sheet. So think about what actually happened here. A private sale between two strangers now runs through a facility, a trained inspector, and a return policy negotiated by a corporation neither party has ever met. The seller didn't choose that. The buyer didn't choose that. The scale of the fraud problem chose it for both of them. There's something almost funny about it. The system built to protect the person selling his own watch ended up requiring that person to prove himself to a corporation before two strangers are even allowed to trust each other at all. eBay solved this one way. Chrono24, the largest watch marketplace on Earth, solved it a different way, and the fix says something even stranger about who gets trusted by default. The photo you now have to take. Chrono24 requires private sellers to submit proof of ownership before a listing goes live, typically 2 photographs of the watch, taken at specific times, matching a format the platform specifies. Every private listing gets inspected before it's published. The platform's own language is direct about the goal. Every watch on the site is supposed to be authentic, full stop, and the burden of proving that starts with the seller before a single buyer even sees the ad. Once a sale happens, the money doesn't go straight to the seller either. It sits in an escrow account. For a professional dealer, that money releases after 14 days. For a private individual, someone selling their own watch, the exact person this entire chapter is about, the hold is 7 days, and often requires the buyer to actively confirm they're satisfied before the payout even triggers. Think about that for a second. The platform trusts a business, an entity with a storefront and something to lose publicly, more automatically than it trusts an individual human being who might actually need that money on time. The company selling watches for a living gets the benefit of the doubt. The person selling their own grandfather's watch does not. That's not really a criticism of Chrono 2.4. It's a description of the entire shift this chapter is tracking. Trust used to be something two people extended to each other directly. Now it's something a platform extends, unevenly, based on which side of the transaction looks more like a business. There's a faster tier, a trusted seller badge that shortens the wait and builds real buyer confidence. But it's not something a private person can apply for and earn over time. It requires a business registration, a tax ID, and documentation proving you're an actual company, verified through Chrono 2.4's own Know Your Business process. Collectors on watch forums say it plainly. The badge simply doesn't apply to one-time or private sellers. Badge or no badge. History or no history. So the fast lane was never a ladder an individual could climb. It's a different lane entirely, open only to people who stop being individuals and start being registered businesses. There's no version of this system where staying purely a private person gets you the same speed of trust that a storefront gets automatically on day one, just for existing as a registered business. Payment apps built the same asymmetry into their own rules, just less visibly. PayPal draws a hard line between its goods and services option and its friends and family option. Use the first, and a seller is protected against chargebacks and fraud claims. Use the friendlier sounding second option, the one that mirrors how an actual private sale used to feel, and there's no protection at all. Forum veterans describe sending money as friends and family as functionally the same as wiring cash to a stranger. It just feels warmer while you do it. So the label private sale survived, but the private part didn't. Every mechanism built to keep the sale honest requires identifying yourself as something closer to a business than a person. Verified, documented, time-stamped, held to a delayed payout, judged by a standard a handshake never had to pass. Somewhere in that ownership photo, the watch beside a handwritten date proving today is actually today, there's a small, specific sadness. It used to be enough to simply be a person someone else believed. Now, you have to produce evidence of being that person, on command, before anyone will let you sell what's already yours. Marketplaces and forums are not the only ones asking for proof now. Even the box the watch travels in has started asking questions. The package nobody will insure. There's one more layer to this, and it rarely comes up when people talk about watch fraud, because it isn't fraud at all. It's the box. Standard shipping insurance from every major carrier explicitly excludes watches and fine jewelry from full coverage, even when a seller declares the actual value on the label. USPS's base liability tops out at $100 for most services. FedEx caps an ordinary jewelry shipment's declared value at $1,000, full stop, unless the shipper already runs a recurring business account enrolled in a separate contract program built specifically for companies that ship jewelry constantly. Read that twice. A business that ships watches every week gets access to a much higher declared value and better terms. A person shipping their own watch once, maybe the single most expensive thing they'll ever mail, gets capped at $1,000 of protection on an item that might be worth 30 times that. So private sellers end up doing what carriers themselves quietly recommend for exactly this situation. Using USPS registered mail, which can be insured up to $50,000 and remains one of the only practical, affordable options for someone shipping high value only occasionally rather than as a business. It also moves slower than almost anything else in the postal system, which means the seller waits, watching a tracking number that barely updates for days, hoping the watch that just left their hands makes it wherever it's going the way it always used to. And if something does go wrong in transit, the claims process still requires proving fault, not just proving loss. FedEx gives 60 days to file a damage claim and 9 months for a lost package. Miss the window, even by a day, and the claim dies on a technicality, whether or not the loss itself was real. Carriers routinely require the original packaging for inspection before they'll even consider paying out. which means a seller who threw away a box in relief that the watch arrived safely has already forfeited the claim before there was ever a problem. Even signature requirements cut the same way. Adult signature confirmation, the safeguard meant to stop a package from vanishing off a porch, only kicks in automatically above a few $100s with most carriers. Below that threshold, a private seller has to know to ask for it and pay for it themselves. The protection exists. It's just opt-in for individuals and standard for the businesses that ship enough volume to negotiate it into their account by default. None of this is a scam. Nobody is lying to anyone here. But it's the same pattern running underneath every other chapter in this story, wearing a different uniform. An individual mailing one watch gets treated as a higher risk, with a lower cap, than a business mailing the same item in bulk every single week. The infrastructure doesn't actually distrust watches. It distrusts people who only do this once, because a one-time seller has no track record for the system to lean on, and systems, it turns out, don't know how to extend trust to anyone without one. The box distrusts you. So, it turns out, does the community you thought you belonged to? The forums turn into border control. Before there were marketplaces with inspection facilities and escrow accounts, there were forums. Places built by enthusiasts, for enthusiasts, where the classified section ran on nothing but reputation and the shared assumption that everyone posting actually loved watches enough to be honest about them. That assumption is gone now, or at least it's no longer allowed to stand on its own. To post a watch for sale in the classified section of one of the largest watch forums in the world, a private seller now needs an account that's at least 90 days old and has made at least 100 posts. Not because the forum wants engagement. Because scammers create accounts, post a fake listing within the hour, and vanish, and the only defense the community found was to make that not worth anyone's time. 90 days and 100 posts is a 10-year requirement bolted onto a hobby that used to require nothing but showing up. Moderators on these forums describe their unpaid job in a specific way. Band members creating new accounts through different browsers, pretending to be someone else, forcing volunteers to cross-reference writing styles and shipping histories just to catch repeat offenders before they scam somebody twice. One moderator put it plainly, "This isn't eBay. It's a group of people who share a passion, now spending hours doing something closer to detective work than moderation." Think about what that means for somebody entirely new to the hobby. They just bought their first real watch, and they want to sell it to fund the next one. They can't. Not through the community built specifically for people like them. They haven't been around long enough. The very openness that used to define a hobbyist forum is the thing the forum had to close off to survive. Smaller sites built specifically to route around the post count rule exist too, connecting private buyers and sellers directly without any tenure requirements standing in the way. Even their own help pages are honest about the trade-off. Transactions happen entirely between two parties, and both sides are told, plainly, in writing, to exercise their own caution because nobody else is going to do it for them. Skip the gatekeeping, in other words, and you're handed back exactly the risk this whole chapter has been describing, just with fewer people watching. The tenure requirement isn't really about proving you're trustworthy, it's about proving you're patient enough to wait, which turns out to filter out most of the people in a hurry to scam somebody. But patience isn't free either. A brand new collector who just discovered the hobby has to spend 3 months and 100 posts building a paper trail before the community will let them sell, all while scammers who've already cleared that bar once simply open a new account and start the clock again somewhere else. The honest newcomer waits. The dishonest veteran restarts. That's not a flaw anyone intended. It's just what happens when the only tool available is time, and time treats everyone the same regardless of what they actually did with it. Has a rule like that ever kept you out of a community you actually belonged in? So picture the arc completely. A private sale used to require nothing but 2 willing people. Now it requires a tenured forum account, a time-stamped ownership photo, an escrow hold, and in some cases, a paid third-party inspection. And even after clearing every one of those hurdles, the individual seller still gets treated with more suspicion than a company would. You didn't lose the right to sell your own watch. You lost the right to sell it as just a person. Every path forward now requires proving you're something closer to an institution first. And that reframes everything you just read. This was never really a story about fakes. It was never about the fakes. So, ponder this. Every mechanism in this chapter, the inspection, the escrow, the tenure requirement, the ownership photo exists to solve a fraud problem. But look at what they actually built to solve it. Not a better way for two people to trust each other more. A replacement for the two people entirely. Nobody engineered a way to help a buyer and seller trust each other. They engineered a way to make that trust unnecessary. The buyer doesn't need to trust the seller anymore. They need to trust eBay's inspection partner, or Chrono24's escrow account, or a forum's post-count rule. The individual human being on the other end of the transaction has quietly become the least important part of it. That's the actual story. Private sale isn't disappearing because people got more dishonest. It's disappearing because the systems built to catch dishonesty only know how to trust institutions, and an individual person, however honest, can't produce the paperwork an institution can. You can be the most honest seller who ever listed a watch. Keep every receipt, answer every question, ship the same-day payment clears, and it still won't matter to the system deciding how fast you get paid. The system was never built to measure honesty. It was built to measure paperwork. And honesty doesn't come with a form. Somewhere in that shift, something got lost that has nothing to do with security at all. The diner table version of a sale, cash counted between two coffee cups, wasn't just a payment method. It was a small act of two strangers deciding to believe each other, on purpose, for no reason except that it usually worked out fine. That's gone now. Not because it stopped working, because it stopped scaling. A world connected through the same few apps needed something a handshake never had to offer: proof. And once proof became the requirement, individuals lost by default. Institutions always have more of it. Maybe that's the real ending worth sitting with. Every fix in this chapter, the inspection, the escrow, the tenure rule, the insurance cap that treats a one-time seller worse than a business shipping the same item weekly, was built by someone who wanted to solve an actual problem. None of it came from malice. It just all pointed the same direction, one reasonable decision at a time, until the person selling their own watch had less standing in the process than the corporations built specifically to police it. Nobody voted on that outcome. It arrived through 100 small, sensible choices, each one making perfect sense in isolation. And none of them asking what happens to the individual once all of them stack together. The platforms selling you protection aren't wrong that fraud is real. They're just solving it in the one direction that was always going to win, toward more paperwork, more verification, more middlemen standing where trust used to stand on its own. That's not corruption. It's just what happens when a system gets too big for anyone in it to actually know each other. So it is what it is now, and for now, there's nothing we can do about it. So let me know what you think. Like this video and subscribe.